everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all here for this panel on EU regulation of crypto assets. My name is Jennifer Douard. I'm a senior advisor at Gide law firm. And I wanted to thank the distinguished panelists we have today from EU institutions. So we have here on the panel two reps from the EU Commission, DG FISMA and DG Connect. And we also have the pleasure to welcome ESMA, which is one of the ESAs, based here in Paris. Hadas, Gold from CNN, will moderate this panel. Please give all our distinguished panelists a round of applause.
Hello, everyone. We're very excited to be here. This should be a very interesting panel. How to regulate crypto assets. Is there a European unique answer? And I think that these panelists, these are the people that are in the trenches. These are the people who are helping to decide what possible regulation will look like. The past 4 years, we've seen cryptocurrency prompting a lot of possible regulation. We've seen some countries that see cryptocurrencies as a threat and others see it as a potential. And we've seen some countries that are really sort of embracing it and are enacting and kind of getting ahead of the trend and enacting regulation. Other countries are taking more of a wait and see approach. I found some interesting numbers that in 2017, EU blockchain startups raised some 750 million euros through ICOs, representing over a fifth of all funds raised through ICOs globally. So obviously this is something that regulators like these people here are paying very close attention to. So to get started, there's been quite a bit of activity in this space just in the last 2 weeks or so. So Gundars, I was hoping to start with you. Give us sort of a lay of the land of where you think we are currently in Europe looking at the regulatory space and what's been happening in your arena in the last week or so.
Well, there's a lot happening. I mean, I think we saw in France recently with our law pact, and also I think there's movement towards new regulation in the Czech Republic and in Poland, we hear. Malta has, of course, adopted its regime, and on our side in the European Commission, we just had the next meeting of the European Blockchain Partnership, which is 29 countries, and we're moving towards this year a implementation of a European blockchain services infrastructure, which is aiming at RegTech, diplomas, and certification of audit documents. But in the longer term future, we're looking to utilize ourselves smart contracts and tokenization in order to run systems. So this is a little bit learning while doing, having a regulatory sandbox. And this is part of a pro-innovation policy, you can say, an industrial policy for these technologies in Europe to support blockchain, to support artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, and so on.
Patrick, can you talk a little bit about how you can handle all of the different national interests when it comes to this, and what you think is the best approach to try to balance all of that?
Okay. Well, at ESMA, what we try to do first and foremost is bring about a greater degree of harmonization and what we can call supervisory convergence, so that we don't have member states electing to create regimes that are unique to that member state. And in the terms of the financial asset sector, one of the challenges there is that there's certain types of fundamental regulations, such as MiFID, that are not regulations as such, but they're directives. And when it's a directive, it is not adopted wholly, but it's transformed into national law. So what goes about defining a financial instrument, and what certain tokens are financial instruments in the European Union, is not homogeneous across the member states, and that creates a real challenge for us, because the way in which each member state may have transposed MiFID may determine whether they consider a token, for instance, to be a financial instrument.
And this is to anybody, do you find that member states are willing to agree on definitions, or do they have vastly separate ideas of what everything actually stands for?
So in preparing our advice to the European institutions on crypto assets, we did a survey of the member states, and we gave the member states 6 sample tokens. All of the tokens were available to European investors, and we asked them, based on the principles, that MiFID is based on, and how you've translated international law, which of these do you consider to be a financial instrument? And we did get differing opinions across the member states as to whether or not they considered certain tokens to be financial instruments or not.
And can you talk about, I mean, do you think that there should everybody agree on the same definition, and do you think that can be achievable at the EU level?
I think the Commission, and Gundars is going to speak to this, I believe, is looking at 2 issues right now relative to crypto assets. One, the degree to which existing legislation, such as the Settlement Finality Directive, such as the safekeeping regulation, is appropriate for tokens if they are financial instruments. And we've said certain of them are financial instruments, which means the full realm of EU regulation falls on them. So I think Gundars is going to, again, maybe speak to that. And then for those that are not financial instruments, that are the so-called utility tokens, we advised the European Commission to create a minimalist regime around the issuance of so-called white papers for investor protection purposes, because the white papers are all over the place in terms of the quality of information they provide, and certain anti-money laundering, know your client rules around the exchanges themselves.
Gundars, do you want to pick up on what your work has been?
Sure. Yes, hi everyone. So basically, DG FISMA, which is the Commission department which is dealing with financial regulation for the financial sector, last year asked for advice to the European Banking Authority and the European Securities Markets Authority, which Patrick is representing here. And we asked about the applicability of EU regulatory framework to crypto assets. And we received this advice in January this year, at the beginning of the year. And the, let's say, broad conclusions have been that, as just mentioned from the ESMA side, that some of the crypto assets indeed qualify as financial instruments, which means they are subject to the EU regulatory framework in this area. At the same time, of course, the framework was never developed or drafted with these type of instruments in mind, and therefore the framework may not entirely fit its purpose, in the sense that perhaps some of the requirements are not suitable to be applied to crypto assets, and there also may be some gaps due to the specific form of crypto assets. To basically conclude or to see how EU regulation could be effectively applied to these type of assets, we will do legislative screening, which is a work stream we've just embarked upon at DG FISMA, to make sure that the regulatory framework that we have in the EU financial services sector is entirely fit for purpose and can be effectively applied by the supervisors to these type of assets. And then when it comes to other types of crypto assets, meaning those crypto assets which are not currently subject to EU regulations, there we basically will assess whether the appropriate regulatory approach would be to use some of the, let's say, the type of some of the EU regulation that we have in the financial sector, especially maybe when it comes to secondary trading, when it comes to custody, and also, in terms of transparency requirements when it comes to issuance, or whether a more appropriate approach would be to indeed come up with a dedicated framework which would allow for more flexibility and maybe more, let's say, suited for crypto assets which are not considered financial instruments. I would also like to mention that when it comes to the European Banking Authority, I mean, the advice that we received from them as well mentioned that some of the crypto assets would qualify as electronic money. And this is also important because, of course, we also have legislation in this area. But it is also important for the following reasons. I mean, at the Commission, basically, when embarking on this analytical work, going forward in view of making up our mind on what would be the best regulatory approach, we also would like to come up with something comprehensive. So in a way, with a solution that would not only accommodate crypto assets as we know them in the sense of the ones that are being issued on the primary market via ICOs, via security token offerings, and also on exchanges, but also to capture, or to enable, I should say, rather than capture, to enable the tokenization of existing financial instruments. So also to look at the secondary market in the broader sense, and that is very important, I think, to enable a level playing field between the traditional financial sector players and the crypto industry, and to enable also convergence. Some of the convergence that we've already observed to continue in this space. I'm not sure if I should go on or...
No, that's, well, I wanted to expand on, you were talking about how you can balance the existing regulation, existing laws, and new ones. And Jennifer, as a lawyer, I was hoping you could jump in on this. Should we first look to what we already have, or should we try to create new laws? What is the best approach, do you think? And what does Europe tend to do? Does it tend to look in the past and look at its old current laws, or does it like to create new regulation?
Thank you, Hadas. I think a little bit of both, actually. Of course, as you may know, last week the French Parliament voted the PACT bill, and in this new bill we have a new ad hoc innovative regime for crypto assets, especially for the ones that do not qualify as financial instruments under MiFID, which is this blurry scope that Gundar was describing. So I'm convinced that we need to build up to leverage on these national initiatives. Of course, French is probably one of the more comprehensive regime, and I will elaborate 1 minute on this. But on the other hand, we need to be innovative at EU level. We need to find new solutions because the technology is new, is evolutive, is going to change in the, maybe what we see today, it's different from what we're going to see tomorrow. So we need to have this flexibility you mentioned. But we need also to work around new legal tools, new legal solutions. This is what we have done in the PACT bill. So one or two words on the PACT bill. So in the PACT bill, we have actually extended the regulatory perimeter. And we have covered so-called utility tokens, and to simplify, basically all the tokens that do not qualify as financial instrument under MiFID. And what is the innovative part of the bill is the optionality and the optional nature of this regime. So it's up to the player to opt in for a visa, either for ICO issuance. So if you want to issue a utility token, you can go to the AMF, so Autorité des Marchés Financiers, and ask for this optional visa. So basically this visa given by the regulator that will say, okay, I comply with the requirement put in the law, and I can go out to the market and say, you know, I have provided this information document, so the so-called white paper we used to see. And this has been reviewed carefully by the IMF teams, and it's like being on a white list and using the regulation as a marketing tool. So this is one part of the bill, the PACT bill, so optional visa for ICO issuance. The other part of the bill, and actually it was not in the original proposal, it was an amendment tabled at the Parliament, and it's a new regime for crypto asset services providers. So we have put in the law a list of these providers, so basically crypto exchanges, crypto fiat exchanges, custody of cryptos, this kind of services we have seen developing on the market. And again, here, if I want to be licensed by the IMF, it's optional, and I can go to the IMF and ask for this visa. You see this solution, and you have I have to mention, because this is very important, you have one mandatory requirement, which is IML requirement. We put in the law because it derives from the 5th IML directive, so and it's of primary importance. So you see here the entire goal of this regime was to give some flexibility to the market players, and at the same time ensure credibility of the regime, because if you opt in, you're in, and you are supervised partly and mainly by the French AMF. So here, if I have to answer, do we need a EU unique solution for the regulation of crypto assets? I will say yes, we should, because it's an issue of competitiveness, it's an issue of attractiveness of the single market, and Peteris here can talk about this unique single market we need in terms of digital services. So we need this regime, and probably we need to be creative as we were in the context of the PAC bill.
Yeah, please continue.
I mean, I think I would outline 3 main points. I think we need to be pro-innovation. We need to prevent fragmentation. I mean, we want a digital single market where entrepreneurs, consumers, citizens can utilize the space of all 28, for the moment, member states and 500 million citizens and consumers for their products, for making a choice of also buying products. And then the third main point is listening to you, because really now is a time when we can take inputs from the community as well as, I mean, the consumer side, because we will have a change of parliament and of commissioners, and the new possible legislative program is being assessed. So if you have evidence, if you have proposals, we're obviously looking at what the French colleagues have done, what the Maltese colleagues have done, but ideally we have a regime or a set of regimes at the European level. And then one of the things working with the colleagues from DG FISMA, and based on the very good work done by ESMA and the national supervisors, is looking what, as Gundars was saying, comes into the financial instrument area. If there's other things coming into the e-commerce area, which is us, how to design forward, because the point isn't this is us, this is them. We're one commission, and ideally we're one single market. From our side, something that we are looking to the future with is that we would very much like to enable decentralized systems of machine learning, artificial intelligence, data coming from Internet of Things, data spaces with citizens and startups being able to control their own data, and what tokenization and smart contracts can do for this. So also in the area of smart contracts, we're assessing whether there's a necessity to have mutual recognition of them across the borders in all the member states based on perhaps a certain set of legal principles, if you want them to be legally binding. If they're just to be software, then it's obviously fine to let them function on a blockchain as until now. But if you want them to be legally binding and become more and more perhaps complex and versatile, utilizing them in financial markets, but also for other things like supply chain, delivery, checks on provenance. So I mean, this really is the approach. How do we make Europe the best place for the decentralized digital technologies in general, blockchain specifically, and for our startups and also our citizens and consumers who are ideally benefiting from these possibilities, and probably a livelier and more dynamic capital market, which is on the side of the financial markets colleagues. How can these as financial instruments or not as financial instruments speed up the capital markets development in the EU?
And this is for everyone. When people often think of crypto assets, they think of sort of avoiding the middleman, maybe even avoiding the regulators. So how do you get the industry to trust you and to respect the work that you're doing so that they will want to become part of sort of the regulated side, the light side, you could say?
I can just, at risk of speaking again, but I'll be brief this time, and this is also a little bit of a chance of publicity. Last week, 3rd of April, the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications was started in Brussels, which is a global association. There was an opening by my Commissioner for Digital Economy and Society, Maria Gabriel, but you have companies there coming from the side of the users. I mean, big European companies as well as providers like SAP, and then actually a majority of startups. So looking at blockchain beyond just being ICOs or being beyond just cryptocurrency, but being very useful in areas like supply chain, in other areas where actually tokens can be very useful as part of a more versatile solution in the future, but really rolling this out. And I think there's examples, I think, of Carrefour here in France, and also in other countries of also the luxury industry proving provenance, and also having a really wide set of capabilities of the technology, and then also linking it to the convergence with the artificial intelligence, IoT, and data.
And I wanted to ask Patrick, we discussed earlier about DLT, distributed ledger technology. When taking different approaches, why do you think there's been sort of a wait-and-see approach to DLT, but recommended regulation for the crypto asset sector?
That's a good question, Hadas. Maybe I could just back up and just say, as a regulator, we can take one of three approaches when we are faced with an innovation. We can ban it. We can take, as Hadas suggested with DLT, we take a wait-and-see approach. Or third, we can take a facilitative approach. Well, when do we go about deciding which of these approaches to take? Well, it's when what I would consider or call a tipping point has been reached. So that point between too small to care, too large to ignore. So when we, this past year, banned the distribution of binary options and curtailed the leverage in CFDs, we used our product intervention powers to ban them. Similarly, when we issued a statement not allowing institutions to distribute contingent convertibles to retail investors, we were using our powers. That's the first, the banning. Second, the wait-and-see approach. Why did we take a wait-and-see approach with the DLT, but we recommended regulation with the crypto assets? Well, we didn't think the DLT had reached a tipping point. We didn't want, like most regulators, I would say, to interfere with the development prematurely in the DLT. We wanted to see the ecosystem, governance issues, interoperability issues solved by you, the practitioners, before we became involved. Well, then why did we take what I would consider to be the facilitative approach with crypto assets? Well, there a tipping point had been reached. We saw that in late 2017 that there had been a bubble in that sector. We warned retail investors that they should be careful in investing in these assets. And while we saw risks to them from an investor protection standpoint, we also saw benefits. So when we sent our advice to the European institutions, we recommended that they take an approach which recognized the unique characteristics of these assets in terms of enforcing European regulation.
Now, I know maybe we'll ask Jennifer this and see if any of you want to jump in as well, but I want to talk about the politics versus the legislative. And how much do we need kind of also a political push for this as well? How important is that to this industry, Jennifer?
No, thank you, Hadas, for the question. I think we definitely need a vision. And this is actually what I think we're trying to do in France when we're talking about, how we can innovate by and with the law, and how we can be attractive, and how it's all about the startup nation and what it means in practice. So here we have the vision, and then we have, in concrete life, what it means. I think at the EU level, it's definitely a turning point. When we need to have this political impetus, to drive these probably legislative necessary changes, because as Peteris said, it's not only about the financial sector, it's all across the economic sectors that are key for Europe and for national member states. And one example to answer your previous question about the fact that it's not a niche anymore, it's broader than that. And yesterday at the Ministry of Economy and Finance, we have a representative from Carrefour and Engie, which are one of the most important industrial players in Europe, in France, and even in Europe and worldwide. And they are developing blockchain-based projects. It's not like a utopia, it's in concrete life. And so, yes, I think we need a political vision to accompany this development based on this new technology that can enable economy of scales, that can enable faster transactions and probably all the things we never thought about. So yes, I think we need some political impetus.
I mean, I would only agree with that. I mean, first of all, I'd say without the entrepreneurs, without the community, nothing's going to exist. So, I mean, that's the foundation. But then next, you should have ideally pro-innovation and enlightened civil servants, which hopefully we more or less are. But in a democratic society, in a democratic Europe, we can't accomplish anything without the elected politicians being on the same line. And I think at this moment with President Macron, Bruno Le Maire, my Commissioner Maria Gabriel, Vice President Dombrovskis, we have leadership that is saying digital assets are very possibly a good opportunity for Europe if they have a clear legal framework and a good way forward. And let's take this opportunity. Hopefully the next European Parliament and the next College of European Commissioners and the national governments will continue to support this. But I mean, I think we, you the entrepreneurs, and also us the civil servants have to continue making the case, showing the evidence. There are abuses that we want to address in anti-money laundering and fraud, but this potential is enormous. Let's grab this chance.
And Gundars, or anybody who would like to join in, I wanted to kind of bring this a little bit broader as well. We're talking about Europe right now, but what do you see around the world that is interesting to you in this space when it comes to regulation, or specifically to a specific country within the European Union that you're watching closely? Or if anybody else wanted to take that as well.
Well, I mean, as we heard, of course, I mean, in the EU we have some national initiatives. We heard about France, we know about Malta, we know about other countries. But let's say, I mean, I'm not sure if I can say interesting or not, but I think one thing also maybe a bit relating back to the discussion we just had, I would like to stress is that we don't see, you know, even when talking about crypto assets or potential regulation of crypto assets, we're not seeing them in isolation, right? I mean, we're looking at crypto assets in conjunction with blockchain, because blockchain is inseparable from crypto assets. So in that sense, you know, we're very well aware of the broader context, I think. And I don't think there's any need to worry about some kind of disproportionate regulatory clampdown that could potentially, you know, make crypto assets extinct as an asset class in Europe. I think we will certainly try to assure a very prudent and balanced approach, as it was mentioned, to address the risks that are there, whilst at the same time, of course, enabling the use of these new technologies on a larger scale.
How do you all consider, for example, the United States' approach to this has been? Europe seems to be a little bit further down the road, but what's your take on the US or any other countries and how they're approaching this? If anybody
Well, I think the SEC went up, if we could do a parallel between the way in which the SEC went about it and the way we at ESMA went about it, in looking at investment tokens, I think they took the opposite approach. They began with the assumption that all tokens are financial instruments, and basically said to the community, you know, prove that it isn't. You know, look at the Howey test and make the determination that there isn't some sort of profit incentive associated with them. We, on the other hand, took the opposite approach, as I said, that we made the beginning assumption, okay, let's say none of them are financial instruments. Let's look hard at the definition of MiFID on an EU-wide basis and how you've transposed it into international law, and make the determination on a case-by-case basis which of these tokens are financial instruments.
There's interesting things going on in the United States and states as well. In Wyoming, Arizona, they have legislation both on tokens and on smart contracts. But overall, I would underline that there's very close cooperation right now between the EU and Japan. In the new trade agreement, there's free data flows, and especially on blockchain, we have close collaboration and are trying, how to say, in a soft way to coordinate our pro-innovation policies. And in fact, the Ministry of Economy of Japan has even seconded for 9 months a deputy director of a department to my unit. So I mean, we have a very close collaboration there. But also in this international association, there'll be a government advisory board, and you already have the World Bank, the United Nations, OECD there, and we hope that other countries that are active in blockchain, like Australia, Canada, ideally the US, South Korea, and others will be joining in the very near future.
Yes, maybe one word, Hadas, just to jump off what Patrick said. This is a competitive market, and even for regulators. So this is the reason why we probably need more and more international cooperation. We'll have a panel later today about the need for regulators to cooperate together, and of course, ESMA is one arena where, on a daily basis, EU regulators cooperate and work together. Because of course this is a global market, so when we talk about territoriality, for instance, probably we need new solutions to tackle the risks stemming from these new types of activities and to make sure we tackle the risk in an appropriate way. Of course, we have existing tools such as equivalence, mutual recognition, all of that. Probably we need to work a little bit on this concept in this context, and I'm sure that in the various international bodies such as OECD, IOSCO, FSB, G20, this is the appropriate bodies where we need to discuss international cooperation, because we've seen these diverse and various answers given to these new types of activities, but it's natural, it's normal. But at the end of the day, how we make sure that this is a global market and players can scale up in a sure, appropriate environment.
Okay, in our final 3 minutes, I'd like to get an answer from everybody, a quick 30-second. What is on your horizon? I know we have a new commission coming in, but what for you in your work are you looking towards the next 6 months to a year that you think everybody here should be aware of? If you want to start.
Well, I mean, as I said, for DG FISMA, we're obviously now, immersed in this analytical work on the regulatory approach that should be taken or can be taken to the crypto assets in the two types of distinguishing between the two types of groups. So the crypto assets that are subject to our regulation currently and the ones that are not. And on this one, basically, I think when it comes to the crypto assets that are financial instruments that are e-money and that are already subject to legislation, we will obviously just make sure that as I said, legislation is fit for purpose. Whereas on the other group of crypto assets, I mean, we will do our analysis in-house, and any outcome of this analysis is very likely to come into, let's say, to feed into a public consultation document, which could come out around first quarter of next year, I would say. So everybody will certainly be consulted and given the opportunity to comment on any of the outcome of this analytical work when it comes to this type of crypto assets. And of course, we are also open, as Peteris said, to any interaction. If you have some technical expertise, technical knowledge to contribute already at this stage, then don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
And I didn't mention the think tank mapping part of our blockchain strategy, and this is actually an opportune time to do so because the 24th of May we'll be having a workshop in Brussels on digital assets. The EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum, you can find their website, is organizing that with us, the Commission. You can all come, you're all welcome. Probably if everyone comes, you'll fill the room, but you can register online, and there we will look at, with a little bit of a more emphasis, the tokenization to run decentralized systems rather than just looking at the financial instruments, though those will inevitably come up, and I think the FISMA colleagues, Gundars and others, will be participating. So we'd very much welcome seeing you there, and let's help set a blockchain policy, blockchain strategy together with the entrepreneurial community that will give Europe a leadership role.
I'd say our work going forward is two-pronged. On the one hand, we're going to work with the 28 plus 3 member states, EEA countries, to better understand when a given token is a financial instrument. So get around those discussions so that we can try to bring about a greater degree of harmonization across the European Union. And then secondly, we are looking at doing work on tokenization of financial instruments in general.
And Jennifer?
I'm not at the regulator anymore, so it's a little bit different, but I just can agree with what Peteris said. I think it's an open dialogue with the community and hand in hand with public institutions, and this should keep going on.
Well, we are perfectly out of time, so thank you all very much for attending, and thank you all for your time. This was really interesting.